And I want you to think about the output of discovery, not as like a spec or a design or a solution. I want you to think about the output as confidence and making a decision. We're going to talk about continuous discovery and delivery. I've had a very privileged career. I've managed to, whilst my first kind of role inside product teams was definitely in a feature factory or thereabouts, I spent most of my career in teams where things like continuous discovery and delivery has been the norm. And I realized that's a very privileged place to be in. And that's the reason why I love doing what I do today, which is running these webinars and coaching. I get to share that experience with many people and help them be able to do product in that way as well, and talk about all the benefits around that too, which is what we're going to go through today. So I want to share some of my experiences about continuous discovery and delivery, often referred to as dual track or dual track agile, that type of stuff. We're going to talk about some of the pitfalls. We're not going to spend too long on that. It's a lot I want to cover. We're going to talk about some of the things about transitioning towards it. So some of you might not be working in this way today. I want to give you some real actionable, helpful tips and tricks around being able to do that. I want to give you some recommendations and some advice as well about making it more effective. So on that point, like I said, I've got a lot to cover, so let's just get straight into it. Before we get into dual track and continuous discovery and delivery and what does that look like, I want to just level set and cover two things here and just re-baseline. The first one is I just want to frame product discovery. So to me, product discovery is all about reducing risk. So we reduce risk through research. That's what it's about. When we start a new idea, there is a high degree of uncertainty, there's a high degree of risk. And what we do is we do research techniques and we apply research in order to gain more information, to uncover some of those unknowns, and therefore we gain confidence and we reduce risk. That is what discovery is about. It's about reducing risk, and we do that through research. Now, Agile, and I'll explain why I'm going to talk about Agile because it's pertinent to when we get into product discovery, and something's gone wrong with this image. I'm going to just draw it. There should be a line literally just up through here. So when we think about Agile, and this is a very common visualization of like waterfall versus Agile or more traditional methods or big bang methods over Agile. Agile is trying to solve the same problem. It's also about de-risking. However, it goes about it in a slightly different way. We still do learning, but we learn through building. So what this is trying to visualize here is that whilst we work on something for a very long time, we carry in a lot of risk. We haven't tested it, we haven't integrated it, we haven't done all of those types of things, which means that we have a lot of risk. And then at the end, problems arise, no surprise there. Agile, on the other hand, tries to tackle this problem by de-risking through breaking things down. So this is trying to visualize that we try to do these little increments or iterations where we can then test it, integrate it, all that type of stuff. And we learn and we de-risk via that way. Now, what's important about all of this and why I'm starting here is it's not an either or. So to summarize what I just said, discovery is about reducing risk by learning through research, and Agile is also about reducing risk, but learning through building. I say this is not an either or because some of you might have experienced this, where I walked into companies, I've had this in my prior experience as well, where there's a bit of friction between these. Some people on the more agile side of the fence think that, if we spend time doing research or looking at things, it's kind of like big, upfront design. Why would we spend time doing research when we could just build something and then they can tell us that it's wrong and then we can fix it? And then the people on the more design discovery side of the fence are like, are you crazy? Why would you build something and let them tell you that you're wrong when you could do a little bit of research and find out that it's wrong in the first place and just not build that and build the right thing the first time? Now, the reason why I break these down to these kind of first principles or these kind of core definitions is because it's not an either or. Inside discovery, we can bring agile like thinking and agile mindsets in, and also on the agile side, we wanted to bring that discovery side of the fence in too. And this is what dual track is really trying to achieve, is trying to get the balance and the best of both worlds, because really we should be doing both. So I'm going to make this real in a second, but I want to just paint a picture before we get there. Some of you might be in this space, many companies are, where we still kind of have this, big project discovery upfront, where we want to basically do multiple weeks of discovery. Some of you might be doing multiple months of discovery. That scares me if that's you, but we'll get into that in a second. And what you're coming out with at the end of that discovery is you're coming out with these designs and essentially like, this journey and potentially designs as well. And it's like, this is the solution that we're going to build. And we have tested that solution and it solves the problem, and we've put it in front of customers and they're telling us that it's the right thing and it's effective solution. And then we can move into this delivery mode where we break that down often into like different user stories and stuff. And then we deliver it in this more incremental or iterative fashion. This is okay as like a stepping stone. And I'm not dogmatic about this at all, because some discovery is better than no discovery. So if this is you, this is better than you not doing any discovery and people just dreaming up this thing to build, or a stakeholder is telling you to do it and you're just going ahead and building it. So this is an okay tradition, like a transition point. However, the problem that a problem that sits here is how we view discovery. We almost view discovery as trying to find the answer. Like that the goal of it is to come out with this, this solution. This is what we need to do. This is the problem. It's been validated. This solution's the right solution to build. And then we move into this delivery mode. Whilst you are in this mindset, you're going to struggle to do continuous discovery and continuous delivery. So instead, found this useful for me. Others have found it useful as well through my coaching and training. I want to reset this mindset, and I want you to think about discovery or the output of discovery, not as like a spec or a design or a solution. I want you to think about the output as confidence and making a decision. Some people frame discovery as a decision-making process, and I really like that, to be honest. I think that's a great way to frame it. Because if you view discovery as trying to do research in order to gain information so you can gain confidence, right? Why are you gaining confidence becomes the next question. And the answer is because I want to make a decision. And that decision is not necessarily like, here's the exact thing to build. It's confidence in a direction. So if I have confidence that we're heading in the right direction, then I can, before I try to do more discovery, I might have enough confidence to, which is what this little small text says down here, to build something, to build a small version of like the first small thing of this thing that I can do. And this is where we start to get into that continuous discovery and delivery, when we start to have more of this mindset, when really what we're trying to get to is just a decision point to go build something. And then we can continue to do discovery, and then we can build more, and then vice versa. I'm going to try and make this real in a second. So how does this look like? Of course, there's a point in time where when we start something, maybe we are doing discovery at the start, so we can just gain that initial confidence that we're heading in the right direction. Then, as I was talking about just then, we kind of want to move into this delivery phase. So I'm going to do delivery down here. And then we want to build that, I'm going to call it V1 of that thing. It could even be smaller than a V1. It could just be like a few things together. Right? Iteration 1, we should probably call it. And then we're going to get feedback on that first iteration. That feedback's going to feed back up. We can do more discovery, and then we can do, V2. And then we can do that again and again, and we can have V3. Now, one thing that is happening here is you'll notice that there's still like a gap. This is still a little bit more step stage, right? We still got like discovery, delivery, discovery, delivery, discovery, delivery. The reality is we can close this gap, because there's no reason why, and I'll draw it below so it looks a little better. There's no reason why Let's do this. So that's V1. There's no reason why, whilst we are building V1, so that's delivery, we can't start doing discovery on what V2 might look like. I'm gonna write disco, not the dance, discovery. Although maybe we could do a dance inside discovery. But you can see what I'm talking about here, right? We can start to do discovery for the next one whilst we are building. And this is where we start to get much more towards that continuous phase until the V3. But you can probably guess some of the other things that are happening whilst we are doing that. I'm just going to pick a different color. So obviously, there's probably a phase during V1 where we're not getting a lot of feedback back. There might be a little bit. So I'm going to draw a dotted arrow. And that feedback might be via building it, right? Like as we actually get into the technical implementation and the feasibility side, we might learn a few things, might run into some hiccups. That's feeding back to us, right? But once we do have that V1 out the door, obviously we're going to be getting heaps of feedback during that time. And equally, that's going to continue. So what we can do is, whilst we are doing discovery for V2 or V3 or V4 or whatever, X number, we can be incorporating that feedback as well. And this is how we start to mix those two things together, where we can get feedback. We're mixing the best of both worlds. We're getting feedback after building something, and we are still discovering and learning more about the problem, learning more about our customers, learning more about the solution, and we're incorporating all of that together in future iterations. So this is how continuous discovery and delivery really starts to look. And yes, there is maybe a period of time where we only are doing discovery up front, and maybe there's also a period of time towards the end when maybe we're sunsetting a product or maintaining it, where there's not much discovery happening, or maybe none at all. But largely, for the most part, we can work this way and we can be doing these two at the same time. I will also say that just up front, there is often still things you can do down here. Like you can start setting up repositories and servers and environments. Like there's stuff that you can do, although maybe you don't want to invest time and energy into doing those things whilst you don't have confidence in an idea. Now, just to make this drawing a little bit more complex, there is another aspect to all of this, which is if discovery is about, so if you go back to here, discovery is about confidence, the opposite can also be true, which means that we can also lose confidence in an idea or a direction. And this is actually one of the powerful things of discovery, is we should be stopping and avoiding the bad ideas. So a decision could be to go and try and build something like the smallest version of it. It could be to bin it because, hey, I actually lost confidence. This is not a good idea. That's a very bad garbage bin, by the way. I need to take drawing lessons. And then the third one could be to pivot. So this could be, I don't have enough confidence in the idea that we should build something. I don't want to bin it, so I haven't lost enough confidence that I want to bin it. But maybe we can pivot and start to explore this area, and maybe something comes about that. There's probably one more, which is I just need more discovery, which maybe you just don't have enough confidence to do any of the other three yet, and you just want to do a little bit more discovery. That's also okay. But we're trying to minimize the time that we spend in discovery before we start building is a key thing. That means during this process, we are also binning things, trying to draw a terrible garbage bin, right? So not everything is going to flow into building. There is going to be the occasional thing, and maybe more often than not, we're actually binning a bunch of opportunities or problems or ideas or solutions that we don't think are good ones. Equally, we could be pivoting away from these things, and we could be binning that as well. And maybe we ditch it after V3 and we go in a completely different direction. And this is not V1 anymore. It's like the second thing. It's like a new thing, right? So this enables us to do that. It enables us to have that flexibility and to be able to move in that way. It does make things a little bit more complicated, but this is the benefit, right? Like we can bin solutions early on. We can bin opportunities early on, all that type of stuff. So hopefully this starts to visualize it for you. What I want to transition to next is talking about some of the things that really will help enable this to work and work just more effectively, and some things that you need to consider. Also, some things around transitioning. So if you haven't picked up already, this works really well in spaces where there's a high degree of uncertainty. So let me paint the picture of the opposite of this. Imagine if you had some of you might work in regulatory, like regulated industries. You might just have some regulation thing to do, and the scope of what you need to do is pretty clear. Probably is more of a design problem than like a full-on trying to validate the problem and stuff like that, because like it's not really a problem, we need to do it anyways. So in that space, it's probably more of a design thing. Yes, we can do a bit of discovery, we can break it down, but we're very largely in the solution space, not in the kind of problem space. So this whole, and also if you're doing a regulatory thing, you don't really have the opportunity to bin it, right? Like you're not like, oh, this is a bad idea, we're not going to do that. You have to do it. So the output's less confidence and a decision, it's more designs in that sense. So the previous world that I described kind of works really well in that. Yes, you can still do continuous discovery and continuous delivery in that sense, but I'll probably say it's probably more continuous design, if I was to use that as a word to make a delineation, than necessarily continuous discovery, because we're not so much discovering, we're more designing and refining and heading towards a solution. This way of working, though, works really well like this. And to just paint a picture of some of the considerations you need to have and how this starts to look, this means we need to be outcome orientated, right? So we need to have an outcome that we're driving towards, that we can navigate towards, and we can discover things. So just to paint a theoretical example, imagine that we had an outcome that we're driving towards that might be something like conversion. Actually, I'm going to change that, not conversion. Make it experience, right? So we want to make the experience better. Now, we might do an initial piece of discovery, just like a broad brushstroke discovery, where we look at the whole, like in this case, mobile app. I'm just using that picture photo that I have as an example. We might do a broad brushstroke to kind of look at what parts of the experience are better than others, which ones are the ones that really suck that we can really improve. And let's say that you do that and you realize that onboarding is the big pain point, right? So you're like, okay, now we're starting to hone in on onboarding. A trap is taking this and then going and doing, again, the big project style discovery, where we launch into the several weeks of like, let's redesign the whole of onboarding. Let's test it and redesign this whole thing. And again, because you're approaching it from the mindset of like the output being a whole new onboarding. A different mindset, which is approaching it from a more continuous point of view and from that whole confidence thing, would be to look at onboarding and then do another kind of like broad brushstroke of discovery. And when I say this, I'm talking like it could be 2 weeks or 1 week. It's not like a lot of effort. It could even be a few days. And you might hone in and say, you know what, actually this part, if we look at the whole onboarding process, this part is the worst. Like this is what everyone hates. Everyone gets stuck on. It has the biggest drop off, click-through rates through the floor, et cetera, et cetera. That's great, because then you can do a bit of discovery on that. You can then build a first version on how you might improve that. Then you can go back up and say, did the experience actually improve? Did we achieve that, OKR, if it was, did we achieve that through V1? And the bet is that you didn't. And that's fine. Okay, let's understand more. Let's do a V2. Did it improve click-through rate at this point? Did it achieve that? Scrolling too much. Did it achieve that OKR? Yes or no? And let's say that we keep doing that and we improve click-through rate and we improve this part of the experience the best we can, and we still haven't hit the OKR. Well, great. What we would do is, again, some discovery, and we'll just move on to the next piece in the process. We might move on to here, or we might move on to here. That's how this starts to work. We move to the next opportunity. And this is why, for those who are a big fan of, and I am, of like people like Teresa Torres and her opportunity solution tree, which basically has like the outcome at the top and then opportunities, I'm just going to do O's. Opportunities too long, and then we start getting into solutions and experiments. This is why this works so well, because you can kind of like tick off or cross off the opportunities and you can move on to the next one. And it's why it's such a good method for visualizing your discovery work. But this is what you're doing here. You're essentially working your way through different opportunities, coming up with different solutions and iterating on those solutions until you achieve this outcome. And the best part about doing all of this is you might improve half of the onboarding process and you might achieve your outcome, which, yes, the onboarding process could be better, but maybe that is good enough for now, which means that we, again, save a lot of time and energy and we haven't redesigned the whole thing. We've done enough for now. Let's move on to the next biggest problem. Let's actually start to, focus our energy elsewhere. Because if we continue here, there's opportunity cost, right? A few other things to touch on. This way of working often means that we are also kind of separating our backlogs. I'm actually a big fan of doing like classes of work where we actually start to divide things up between like tech debt and UI and features and that type of stuff. But at a bare minimum, you actually kind of need to start to think about separating opportunity work. In other words, what are the things you need to do discovery on versus development work? And in this case, this is supposed to be a bin. Some things disappeared on my slides. So you need to start to do this separation. So this is one of my tips or one of the enablers or things that you're going to need to do as a transition. Not saying you have to do this. Of course, you can have it all together in one mega backlog, but I tend to find this is much easier to manage. And particularly if things are going to be binned, it's kind of noise if you have it mixed up with everything else. These are just some photos of different opportunity backlogs. This is an opportunity backlog in that photo. This is my friend Bernsey, who's doing a really good job of being a camera person, walking through an opportunity canvas. That's a Jeff Patton opportunity canvas there. I'm a big fan of doing backlogs in different formats too. So, putting your opportunity backlog across your conversion funnel, which done in the past is multiple times now, is awesome because you're mixing this data with your opportunities. It's awesome, but more of a sidebar there. I've got a link. If anyone's interested, I'll share this. The last thing I want to cover before we get into a few little bonus things and then I get into questions is the common question I get asked is, and some of you might be thinking it, somebody might have asked it already, which is, who does this, right? If we're doing continuous discovery and delivery, is this 2 teams? Is this 1 team? And the answer is it's 1 team. And there's many reasons for that. Is because if the people doing discovery aren't the people who are building it, there is a lot of knowledge that is lost between here. And the challenge becomes that there's a whole bunch of information and context that they got that went into shaping a solution. It also makes it very hard to do that really broken down continuous model. This, if you have it as separate teams, it kind of lends itself more to that project world that I talked about before, where you have this big bang discovery and then you start to break it down. It becomes much harder to do the continuousness. So it's actually 1 team. So how does this look? Because it's like, well, how does 1 team do all of this? Well, if I frame the life cycle of an idea to be something like this, where we have discovery, and I'm visualizing it this way because it's more of a continuous point of view, which means that we are continuously doing discovery and then we're also doing delivery. So that's why it's 2 wedges. There are going to be people in the team. If you have a cross-functional team, there are going to be people in the team that tend to lend themselves more towards discovery, so more to this side. And there's going to be people in the team that lend themselves more to this side. A simple example would be a UX researcher. A UX researcher is amazing to have on a team if you're lucky. And they are much more like their skill set and the speciality is discovery. They will sit more on that side of the fence doing discovery. Just like you might have engineers as an example would largely be more on the delivery side of the fence. Now, the reason why I draw it this way as a wedge, and also the reason why I say it's 1 team, is because the trouble here is assigning people to one or the other 100%. So I draw this as a wedge because whilst you might have a UX researcher who does discovery, I would actually frame it more as that. I'm going to use a different color, otherwise this is going to look messy. I would actually frame it more as that they're 80% discovery and they do 20% on the delivery side. Just like from an engineer point of view, it'll be the other way around. I'll say that you're more 80% delivery and 20% discovery. If you do 100% and you make a very clean cut, all you're doing is you're going back to like this model where you've got sub teams within a team. And the reason why an 80-20 is an arbitrary number. Like this could be 70-30, it could be 60-40, it could be 50-50 for some people. But I just take 80-20 as a like a yardstick, right? What are you doing in that other 20%? Well, from an engineer point of view, the last thing I want to do is for the first time an engineer sees something to be like in sprint planning or when they have to build it. They should have seen it way earlier. They should have been involved in it. So I want to pull them into discovery. I want to bring them into workshops. I want to make them listen to customers. I want to interview customers with them. I want to, do discovery playbacks with them. So I'm bringing them into discovery. So they are getting that context. They are hearing it firsthand, and they're not being surprised when it comes to sprint planning or something like that. However you work. Equally, on the other side of the fence, I'm sure all of you have experienced this. Whilst you may be predominantly in discovery, things come up in delivery. Like there's trade-offs, there's questions, there's clarification. So even as a user researcher or a designer, you get pulled into the delivery because you need to answer questions and you need to help, right? So it's not as clean cut. And if you want to get that feedback going between these two tracks, you have to have yourself split across both. But you would have a primary focus and a secondary focus, and same with other people, and they might have it the other way around. Now, I put product trios at the top here because this wouldn't be a product talk if I don't draw a Venn diagram. So let's draw a Venn diagram. Most of you would be familiar with the model of DVF, meaning desirability, viability, feasibility. This often maps to like the user, to the business, and to the tech, which maps itself quite nicely to design, to product, and then to engineering. So if you haven't come across the term product trios before, this is often what they're referring to, is these three roles where we have design, product, and engineering representing each of these kind of quadrants or circles. And at an absolute minimum, we want to have that as the people who are predominantly focused on discovery. Now, from an engineering point of view, it's often a tech lead or a senior engineer or an engineering manager. Often in teams, they only have one designer. But if you have multiple designers, it's usually more of a researcher or a lead designer or a UX designer, and product is product. The reason why I bring this up is because whilst I actually don't like being too strict on like the trio, because I think most teams will lend themselves quite naturally, and it also depends on who do you have in your team. At a bare minimum, this trio is a really good model to just think about. Like if you can have the trio be 80%, I'm using 80% as a yardstick. It doesn't need to be 80%. I think you should think about your context and what makes sense. In discovery, that's a good starting point. So I'd start with the trio. So that's a good transition. You can, if you're struggling to get engineers involved in discovery, start with one engineer as an example, right? Just start there. So that is just a good thing for transition. Now, I am at the time of content, and I knew I'd be there. So that's the reason why this was some of the stuff I also wanted to cover. I just threw them in here with some links. I will share this Miro board. I'll throw it in at the end so you can go and click on some of these links and read about it. But there's some obvious considerations like, not everything needs to go through discovery. Continuous integration, continuous delivery is deployment, is part of it, CI/CD. We need to minimize dependencies, all that type of stuff. Cool. That's enough of me talking. I want to get into questions. I can see the chat go in, so we're going to get into that. Don't drop off yet. stay for the questions. I know many people get a lot of value out of the questions. If you have a question, start writing your question now. So I'll see it pop up and we can pull the questions up. Whilst people are writing their questions, like I said, stay on because I think you get the most value out of contextualizing all this, and we can get into some of the nuances and things that I might have glossed over and didn't cover too much. I just want to talk like really quickly about product pathways. So product pathways, it's all focused on helping you build your craft. So the courses look something like this. At the moment, I got 4 courses, which is prioritization, stakeholder management, a product strategy one, and one about starting a new role. So the prioritization essentials one is really good for those who are just starting out. It covers some of the, a few prioritization methods, some of the core components around prioritization to get you thinking about that. Stakeholder management, we go into influence, we go into trust, how to create alignment, whole bunch of tools and templates around stakeholder management. How do you engage your stakeholders? Product strategy is my latest one. It's jam-packed. It's really focused on trying to just make strategy really actionable for you and something that's not so elusive. Again, there's tools, there's templates. You can see some of them in that picture. Product strategy workshop, help you be able to build your product strategy, turn it into something just really actionable and simple. And first 90 days is all focused on building that success. I got a whole bunch of other things. Obviously, I run these webinars. There's YouTube, so there's plenty of free stuff as well. Obviously, run these webinars every month. And over on the website, if you go on the free resources, so productpathways.com, there's a bunch of templates and resources. I'm not going to ask for your email address. Nothing's gated. You can go and use it just there to help you do product better. These are all templates that I use. I use them every day in my coaching, at least one of them really. With the clients that I have. So it's all there to be used. Cool. On that point, let's get into questions. So Stephen is asking, how much time should you split between each practice, discovery and development? Same teams only spend discovery times at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, great question there. So if you move into that continuous discovery, continuous delivery kind of pattern, you should be doing an ongoing amount of discovery. So there's no when you think about split, the split wouldn't be, we do 2 weeks of discovery at the beginning of the quarter, and then the rest is development, right? Stephen knows me, so he knows that I've seen this as well. That's not what we're talking about here with continuous discovery. That's probably more that project one where we spend that time up front and then we move into building. If we're doing continuous, discovery should continue throughout the whole quarter. We should be constantly doing it. The split more becomes capacity, right? Like how much of the team. So if we have, 7 people in the team, who is more focused on discovery? Who is more focused on delivery? And how much are we giving to each side of the fence? So if you think about 7 people, if you had that trio, and that trio was predominantly focused on discovery, that would be more the split. The split would be, hey, you 3 people, I want you to do discovery most of the time. Now, I used 80-20, but 80-20 is arbitrary. It could be 50-50, right? And it could be 60-40. A lot of this is going to be contextual to how much discovery do you need to have, how much uncertainty is there, how much time do you need to invest into it, how much do you need to support delivery? There's a lot of other questions in there, but that's kind of how I would be thinking about the split in the context of dual track and continuous, as opposed to upfront in the quarter. So Steve said that his product is pivoting partially towards being more internally facing platform. In other words, enabling other teams to build on top of it. So platform. And then his question was, is it sufficient to treat these internal dev PM teams as end users in order to adopt CD? What do I think? So a CD in this sense, continuous discovery. I'm going to go back to my iPad just very briefly on this one. So platform, totally the case. That's cool. Platforms happen. Plenty of platform teams. And the short answer is yes, but the reason why I'm sketching is because I want to just add a little bit more of a nuance here for you, Steve. So you're building a platform that other teams are going to build upon. And then the question becomes, well, not a question, it's hypothetical. They are obviously building products for end users, right? So you're a enabling team and they're a customer-facing team. Now, whilst yes, you can treat and you should treat these people as your users. It's hard to say customer here because I don't pay you, but you get my point. You understand this. Yes, they are one of your users. You should also still be making sure you understand some people might frame this as the end users or the customer in this sense. You should still be investing into understanding what those people do. There is a mistake, and this is why platform product management is actually harder. Like, there's no ifs or buts about it. From my perspective, it is harder, and often that's why we put more senior people on it. Because rather than you just having this relationship where it's just like your product and customers, you now have a daisy chain. You need to understand those internal teams and what they're doing and their tech stacks and their products and what they're trying to solve, what end customer problems they're trying to solve with their products off your platform. Like, what does your platform enable for them? This is harder. You basically need to understand the end customers almost as well as them, but then you also need to understand them and you need to understand everybody else very well. So from a continuous discovery point of view, I would be doing it with both of these people. And this is why I draw this, because I don't want you to neglect those end people and just focus internally. That's very easy to become like an order taker, to be like, oh, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. It's like, no, I want to understand what you're trying to achieve. And this is better because you're trying to solve problems for them. And if you can preempt what they need in the future, you start to decouple this relationship and you don't have to deal with dependencies and stuff like that too much. So hopefully that helps and answers the question. All right. Do I have any tips on how to convince leaders in organizations that prioritize delivery, execution, output, and fast release cycles over to make space for discovery and see its value, especially in environments where past discovery efforts have run over time and often delivered little value? So great question, Vaya. Like, I think this is something for me that makes me a little bit sad, maybe, because discovery is so powerful, yet I see big, really long discovery cycles very often. And when I I interview stakeholders and senior executives all the time when I work with clients, because I'm trying to do my own discovery, like what challenges that I have, all that type of stuff. And one of the biggest complaints that I hear from them is that discovery takes too long. I don't understand the value of it. Like, it goes on and on. And in a way, I don't blame them, because if discovery goes for 9 months, like, I think that's far too long. You got to break it down. So I think the first thing that we can do, what's in our control, is to break discovery down. And I think if we do more continuous discovery, we can show that, hey, I'm not trying to do discovery for a long time. I'm going to break it down. It's going to be shorter, and we're going to build something very quickly. So we still get that faster release cycles. Maybe not as fast because we've invested a little bit into discovery, but we're still getting that fast one. Another tip, just to also answer the question more directly, something that I've found to be a very useful tool for convincing leaders is to time box discovery. I think time boxing discovery is good practice anyways. But if you time box discovery, it's also a influencing technique to be able to go to stakeholders and say, I'm not asking to do discovery for like 2 months. Like, I'm literally saying all we're going to do is 2 weeks of discovery. And at the end of 2 weeks, we're going to try and make a decision. And that helps put their mind at ease, because they don't have that uncertainty and that fear of thinking that discovery is going to go forever. But where I have had the most success is actually trying to measure impact. And I'm sure you're already thinking about this. But if you can show that the things it's almost like, don't do discovery. Let's build some stuff. Let's then measure the impact of those things. And then when they haven't delivered the impact that we expected them to, stakeholders are going to be asking why, right? Like, oh, it didn't give us blah. And you're like, yeah, that's really fascinating. Would you like us to invest some time into trying to find out why that didn't happen? And then time box that. So go do 2 weeks of that. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, you come up with a bunch of research and a bunch of data as to why that's not working, and a potential recommendation for where to go next. And when you do that, they're like, oh, wow, that sounds really good. Let's do that. And then you can do it. And then hopefully it does actually start to move the needle and move the dial. And then after you've moved the dial, you can say, yeah, that time that we spent to investigate that thing, yeah, that's called discovery. And that's what we're trying to do here. And this is what continuous discovery and delivery looks like. It looks more like this, not as those big upfront, trying to spend 6 months doing it. I've had the most success doing that. It's kind of like do it by stealth a little bit. But what you're doing is you're really showing the impact of it and showing the impact of not doing that. I know that takes a lot longer to probably do. It's going to take you more like 3 months or longer, as opposed to like a quick win and trying to convince them. But yeah, that would be my tips and what I felt that works. Okay, so Lucas asked, how would you guide the discovery process being split over multiple teams across a company so knowledge distributes well? I'm assuming that by this you mean that as we do discovery, we can share those insights across multiple teams, as opposed to like multiple teams doing discovery in the same problem space at the same time. I'm going to talk about the former, and you can tell me if you mean more the latter afterwards. I think discovery playbacks, sharing information, being able to there's little things that we can do here. I'm a big fan that in sprint reviews, we don't just talk about what we built. We don't just talk about development. Like if we're doing continuous discovery and continuous delivery, we should be talking about both of them. Every single sprint review, every single demo, if you leverage techniques like product newsletters, where you do like internal newsletters or maybe internal comms like week notes or just general stakeholder updates, and all of those opportunities, we should be talking about both discovery and both delivery. So if you remember what I talked about before about breaking those two things down, you should talk about what have we learned through research and what have we learned through building, what have we built and what have we learned through building. Like we need to talk about those things all the time. So like little things like that can help, where we are talking about it, we're sharing those insights. I think from especially research teams, design teams, and product teams as well, we can do a lot to share amongst our peers. Again, discovery playbacks, being able to record them or invite like a wider group and bring people in. Obviously, there's tools out there that can help you document insights. The big worry that I have or concern I have around, like if we build like this huge repository of like all of the research that we've done over the last several years, the big problem with that is there's a use by date on that stuff, where the product's going to evolve, the market's going to evolve, your customers are going to evolve, they're going to change. So if you look at something that you did discovery on, like if you look at research that happened 3-4 years ago, there's a question about how relevant it is to today. So things go stale very quickly when it comes to research. So I always hesitate about building like this mega repository that everyone can just query. But I think this insight sharing and sharing knowledge across multiple teams via just really natural channels like sprint reviews, comms, emails, discovery playbacks, that type of stuff, and also sharing amongst your peers, very powerful. I think I generally index more on that than trying to build a big repository, just because things get stale and you end up with a million wiki pages. Everyone knows what that's like. If you enjoyed this webinar and you want to join us live, sign up to productpathways.com or follow us over on LinkedIn. You can find the links in the description. And if you want to learn more about product discovery, I did a deep dive introduction into the topic. You can check that video out right here. And that's it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you at the next one.